reliable promises, doing what you say creates mediocrity. And let me show you how this works in a portfolio setting. So here's a traditional view of a portfolio management process. So you've got this problem where you need to select or maybe prioritize the best projects. It tends to be focused on the executives who are reviewing this periodically, and there's a kind of dashboard, a variety of dashboards about return and strategy against risk and cost, and the committee of the great and the good has to make some choices. So and what's the project doing in this context, or the project leadership? Well, they're delivering on their promises, and then you've got data about what their promises say, right? So I'm going to accomplish this, and I'm going to get this, or generate that much revenue, and you might have some risk factors, right? So, but it's basically about the promise and collecting data for that. Now, I'm sure many of you have participated in these data requests. They can be a little bit of a brownout. So let's take the role of the project leader, who often is overworked and trying to get things done and is facing a very difficult situation. That request for data is a kind of compliance exercise, usually, for the project management and the project team. And it's actually, in a way, sort of worse than that, because think about what outcome they can get by providing data. So a reasonable outcome is I get to continue. A very possible outcome is my project will be canceled or somehow diminished. So one project leader I talked to put it this way: what you're doing with this process is you're asking me for the rope you're going to use to hang me with. So let's just say this is a situation of pretty high bias and fear, and the data you get is fairly well tainted or confused, I guess, by these sort of political and social considerations. Now, the thing is, this idea of a reliable promise is not just that you put this guy in a bad position. It's think about the central challenge of innovation, right? This idea of a promise assumes that success is linear. But of course, we all know that innovation, it's not like that at all. And I would invite you to think a little bit about some product or product line that's the backbone of your business right now. And go back, do a little thought experiment. What was it like when it was an idea, when it was an innovation in a lab somewhere trying to be developed? So the first question I ask yourself is, did it go according to plan? I will bet you it did not. They almost never do. Second thing is ask whether it met the conservative financial returns that were estimated around it. It's business case, essentially. And finance usually puts this kind of standard of conservatism on everything. And the answer is probably not. At least I'd bet that way. It probably wildly exceeded them. So innovation, in a way, doesn't go according to plan, and when it works, it wildly exceeds its expectations. And yet we build processes assuming that things will go according to plan, and that conservative estimation is actually a reasonable way of managing it. And so this is a general phenomenon, right? Many business processes unintentionally make innovation mediocre. So you're going after predictability and efficiency. So product management and finance wants those two things. So what are the unintended consequences? I've seen many big dreams that are trapped inside of small projects, and the project itself can't actually deliver. So this is how people respond. They justify and they talk about their project in terms of their dream. What they're actually doing isn't taking them there. There's a big tendency to focus on your feet. What's next for the stage gate for the project, instead of what it's going to take to win, where you need to be looking at the horizon. The result tends to be safe bets, small steps, clutter, things I can do efficiently, I can do well, I can do predictably, or said another way, playing not to lose versus playing to win.
We've got a question here.
Yes,
and
please.
I think it fits in well. The question is, in your experience, is there an internal struggle between team leaders and team members where one population is more driven to large projects, fighting the mediocrity, as you've been saying, or one population is more interested in playing it safe with smaller but more opportunity cost projects?
Yeah, that's definitely a strong dynamic. And I think the place I see that most largest is between the what I would call the project leader, or maybe a program leader. Some people use different language here, but there's somebody who's in charge of making it happen. And then there is some manager, often like a director level or maybe a vice president, who's trying to get the whole thing to move forward. And you'll see that the director or vice president says things like, we need to take risks, we need to be bold. And then the leaders say, okay, well, here's what I'd like to do that's bold, but I don't have the resources for that, or I can't take that risk. And they may not be forthright about that, but that's what goes through their heads. And so that's the big point of conflict I see. To a lesser degree between leaders and teams, I would maybe call this more the comfort zone principle. So if have a long life as a bench chemist, and what needs to be worked on now isn't the chemistry, but rather, I don't know, making a business alliance or something, I, as the chemist, and the technical challenges will loom large, and I will probably place a bigger importance on them than maybe is warranted given the business problem that you're trying to solve. I mean, sometimes it is technology and sometimes it's not, but the point is the participants in the project tend to think about things through their lens of comfort zone, which produces incrementalism, right? I'm just gonna make this fiber perform a new way. I'm gonna hit this performance specification. And if I can do that, then everything will work. But that may not, in fact, be the right way to move the project forward. Does that address the question? Oh, probably, I guess we're on
Sounded
mute.
like it answered the question to
Okay.
me. Most people are on mute. Oh, yes, he says, yes, thank you. And
Okay.
Alo followed on to that to say, what are your thoughts on the population, such as upper, middle, frontline management, individual contributors? Do you ideally and practically want alignment on portfolio?
Yeah, I think that have to unpack that based on what you mean by alignment. So everybody needs to be on the same page. If alignment means all the promises are lined up, I think that can be a little dangerous, as I'll say. If you talk about it in terms of what moves we're making or how we're prosecuting our future, then you probably do want alignment. So that depends a little what you mean, and maybe I'll come back to that question because I think one of my other surprising points is actually about this a little bit. So please hold me to it if I don't get back to it or don't answer it.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so back to business processes making things mediocre, right? We have this dream of doing something big and important, but the business process we're in actually makes it mediocre. And this is a real problem, I think, particularly for chemical companies, which tend to have large manufacturing lines where predictability and efficiency is actually absolutely paramount. It's baked into the culture, and it should be. But innovation is a little bit breaking the rules. So there's a cultural kind of perspective needed there. So the thing about this idea of portfolio management, if I bring this in, is there's a hidden process in strategic portfolio management. This is different than sort of operational portfolio management. So I started with the left-hand side of this slide, which is about selecting the best projects, which is certainly true of portfolio management. But I think that's about a third of the leverage you can get from a good portfolio management process, because the hidden process is the process that makes project great. And this tends to be focused on teams and tends to be iterative. And so you think about that beleaguered project leader, they're dreaming up some kind of goal or target, and they're making a plan to get it done. And then they're evaluating what they should really do. See, the question is, how do I make the project great? What is it going to take to make this a winning project? And most evaluation and financial systems set the evaluation up as a data gathering task rather than an exploration of what is really worth doing. So these bench chemists aren't trained typically in business thinking, right? And so you've got the evaluation puts all that together. So I think of portfolio management not as sort of the prioritization, the quote yes or no, but rather, how do we grow? And that happens both at the executive level and at the team level. And this evaluation framework pulls that together and actually makes it one process. This is the hidden side of strategic portfolio management that just has massive leverage. If you can make small progress on this point, you'll have better projects. which is actually the right answer for winning with a portfolio. So let me give you a concrete example of this, again, from DuPont. So this was a project. It was one of this, had CEO level visibility. It was based on a strategic alliance with a consumer electronics company that wanted to use one of their materials as the kind of surface, the branded surface, essentially. And this team, they got the A team on this, and they wanted to really make it happen. And they were doing qualification and drop tests and material strength and all that kind of stuff that needed to get done. So that's good as far as it goes. The problem was when they did the financial analysis, and that's shown here. This is a kind of financial analysis that looks at uncertainty. So the position of the vertical line, there's a scale of net present value here. The position of the vertical line is the financial return, and to the right is better. You can see this is very over to the left. And then the width of the bars shows you how much uncertainty there is in those estimations. So they estimated this project and it was small. And this went up to the executives and they said, well, how can one of our most strategic projects be so small? I mean, this is a classic example of a big dream trapped in a small project. And the other thing to notice about this is the range of uncertainty is relatively tight. So this was a predictable project. It was basically, if you went to the project team and you said, what were you really doing on this most strategic project? And we were doing responsive technical support. So as an example of this thinking, they were looking at the average selling price. This stuff is normally sold by the ton. So they were thinking if we could get a 5% lift on price, that would be awesome. That's the upside of this price kind of uncertainty. And that was their dream. So this got a little wire brushing. Went through an innovation workshop to really level it up. And what we discovered was the strategy they were pursuing was the safe strategy. There was another strategy around active business and relationship management. And this strategy is shown in blue. The base value of it is about 10 times the value of the previous one. So for example, average selling price, instead of getting an extra 5%, if you looked at the bill of materials of the competitive material, it was on the order of $100 per unit. And this material sold by the bulk was going to be like 5 cents. So that gap was massive. And they hadn't done the business thinking to understand the value of this product to the customer. They were thinking of cost plus. Why? Because their strategy was responsive technical support. It was safe. They weren't going to have any trouble by getting an extra 5%. Whereas if they thought about the active business management and they tried to price to the value, it seemed a little scarier. But in fact, it was just this massive, massive upside. So that reframed the project. They did need some different kind of resources. They needed some more business development resources. The other thing to notice about this is that this project is less comfortable, not only because you're moving outside of the promise and technical support that everybody's comfortable with, but also it's more uncertain. So these bars are actually bigger. So, but the thing is that the upside is uncertainty. So this project is less predictable because of its upside. And that turns out to actually be a problem in organizations. So this is the key part of it. You've got to use this as a way to help people guide and find the upside of their projects. Now you say, okay, this was one project, it was a special project. Well, turns out it's probably about something like 1 in 6 or 1 in 8 projects. I mean, not every project has this kind of upside in it, but enough do that across the portfolio, it makes a huge difference. And here you're at one of these efficiency things, because it's actually inefficient to ask every project to look at its upside. It can be downright irritating for some people if in fact they're small projects. But if you don't do that, you won't find the big ones. And the leverage of finding the big ones is massive. So there's a big portfolio benefit, and not all projects receive that benefit. But the important thing is that it's possible for a project leader to find upside and reframe their project and get it better. Now, you might say, well, this uncertainty is just kind of speculative, and we don't know if it's going to happen or not. So I have an example here from an agricultural chemical company that wants to be nameless in this. but they have what I call Project X, and they evaluate and reevaluate a project over many years. So back in 2010, when this project was first made, they made something they call this the promise. I mean, this is a financial outcome. How much revenue you're going to deliver. And they had looked at that tornado diagram and saw what factors were driving upside. Could I get pricing? Could I get expansion to this segment? Could I get the formulation to behave a little differently? And they review this every year. And so like in 2013, they figure out how to open up a new segment and the project goes up. In 2015, they figure out how to manage their pricing model. In 2017, they figure out how to get more out of the value chain. And so there's a relentless focus on what does it take to make the project better. And that caused about a 5x increase in the value of the project over time. Had they had a traditional promise-based system, they would have been delighted just to get this little number down here. Because the project was because the system is value seeking, they actually got a 5x kind of improvement. And again, this is massive across a portfolio, because if you think of all those little projects meeting their little promises, it doesn't take very many projects to value seek 5x to justify canceling all of those little projects. So there's a very big kind of portfolio effect here that's quite surprising. What I'm saying here is value seeking is actually better from a strategic portfolio perspective than promise keeping. Or in other words, what's your big idea? Keep the big idea in front of you, find the big ideas, and use your portfolio system and that hidden process to find and develop and monitor those big ideas and make them better. So that's point number 2.